Two armies face each other across a frozen steppe. They wear the same armor, they ride the same horses, they carry the same banners, the standards of Genghis Khan's bloodline, and they are about to kill each other. On one side, the man who will become the most famous emperor in Asian history. On the other, his own brother. The empire their grandfather built, the largest the world has ever seen, is tearing itself apart, and nothing will ever put it back together. Over the last 3 episodes, we've watched a chain reaction reshape the medieval world. The Mongols destroyed Baghdad. The Mamluks defeated the Mongols at Ain Jalut. Baybars destroyed the Crusader states. But there's a question we haven't answered. The question behind all of it. Why did the Mongols lose at Ain Jalut in the first place? They had the largest army on Earth. They had just leveled the most powerful city in the Islamic world. They were on track to conquer Egypt, North Africa, and possibly Europe itself. And then they just stopped. The answer is that they didn't stop because someone beat them. They stopped because they started destroying each other. What happened after 1259 is one of the most epic and least known stories in all of world history. The Mongol civil wars. Brother against brother. Cousin against cousin, the largest empire ever built, ripped apart by the very family that built it. This is that story. To understand why the Mongol Empire destroyed itself, you need to understand the one fatal flaw Genghis Khan built into its foundation. And the best way to see that flaw is through a family tree. Genghis Khan had 4 sons by his primary wife, Berta, Jochi, Chagatai, Ogaday, and Tolui. When Genghis died in 1227, he divided the empire among them. This was standard steppe tradition. Every son gets a share of the father's territory, like dividing a ranch among your children. Except this wasn't a ranch, it was the largest empire on the planet, and the division didn't come with a manual for what happens when the sons disagree. Jochi got the western territories, the lands that would become the Golden Horde, stretching across Russia and into Eastern Europe. Chagatai got Central Asia, the old Silk Road territories. Ogaday was designated Great Khan, the supreme ruler, theoretically above his brothers. And Tolui got the Mongol heartland, Mongolia itself, plus the largest share of the army. Now here's the critical design flaw that would eventually destroy everything. The Great Khan was supposed to be the supreme authority, the final word on all disputes, the commander-in-chief of all Mongol armies, the ruler of rulers. But the other branches controlled their own territories, their own armies, and their own revenues completely independently. The Great Khan could request their cooperation, could coordinate joint campaigns, could mediate disputes, but he couldn't actually compel obedience from a cousin who commanded 100,000 troops and sat on a throne 2,000 miles away. It was less like a unified empire and more like a medieval NATO, a military alliance held together by family loyalty, shared interest, and the personal authority of whoever sat on the Great Khan's throne. And family loyalty is a depreciating asset. It works beautifully for brothers who fought side by side, who shared a father's tent, who bled on the same battlefields and remembered the same stories. It works less well for cousins who grew up in different courts, speaking different languages. And it barely works at all for cousins' children who've never met, who each believe their branch of the family was cheated, and who each think they should be the one in charge. For 2 generations, the system held, barely. Ogaday succeeded Genghis as Great Khan. After Ogaday's death, there was a succession crisis that lasted years before Möngke Khan, Tolui's son, Genghis's grandson, seized the throne in 1251 through what was essentially a military coup. He executed rivals, purged opponents, and centralized power with an iron fist. And here's the thing about Möngke. He was good at the job.
He was the last Great Khan who could plausibly claim authority over the entire empire. He kept the branches in line through a combination of competence, fear, and active military campaigns that kept everyone focused on external enemies. He sent his brother Hulagu west to conquer Persia and Baghdad. We covered that in episode 1. He sent another brother, Kublai, to push into southern China. He personally led the campaign against Song dynasty China's western frontier. The empire was still expanding on 3 fronts simultaneously, still conquering, still functioning as a coordinated unit. But it was functioning because of one man's authority and one man's willingness to kill anyone who challenged it. And in August 1259, while besieging a fortress called Diaoyu in Sichuan province, Möngke Khan died. The cause is debated. Some sources say dysentery, others say a Chinese arrow, others say cholera. The cause doesn't matter. What matters is what happened next. Because Genghis Khan's system had no clear mechanism for peaceful succession. There was no rule that said the eldest son inherits. There was no rule that said the previous Khan could name his successor with binding authority. There was a tradition, the Kurultai, a great assembly of Mongol princes and generals who would theoretically elect the next Khan by consensus. But consensus among armed men who each command tens of thousands of troops means whoever shows up with the biggest army and the most allies gets to be Khan. It was an election where the ballots were swords. And when Möngke Khan died, 2 of his brothers decided they didn't need to wait for an election.
Within weeks of Möngke's death, his brother Kublai, who was commanding the campaign in southern China, declared himself Great Khan. He didn't wait for a Kurultai. He didn't consult the other branches. He just took the title. And almost immediately, his youngest brother, Arik Bokeh, who had been left in the Mongol capital of Karakorum as regent, did exactly the same thing. 2 Great Khans, 2 armies, 1 empire. The Mongol Civil War had begun. The Toluid Civil War wasn't just a succession dispute, it was a philosophical battle for the soul of the Mongol Empire. On one side, Kublai Khan. Kublai had spent years in China. He had adopted Chinese customs, employed Chinese advisors, and was deeply influenced by Chinese and Buddhist culture. He represented a vision of the Mongol Empire as a cosmopolitan, multicultural superstate, an empire that absorbed and adapted to the civilizations it conquered rather than simply dominating them from horseback. He wanted to build cities, establish bureaucracies, integrate conquered peoples into the system. On the other hand, Arik Bokeh. He represented the traditional Mongol way, life on the steppe, rule from the saddle, the warrior culture that had built the empire in the first place. To Arik Bokeh and his supporters, Kublai wasn't a visionary. He was a traitor, a man who had gone native, who had abandoned the traditions of Genghis Khan, who wanted to turn Mongol warriors into Chinese bureaucrats. This wasn't just brother against brother, it was tradition against transformation, steppe against city, the old world against the new, and both sides had armies willing to die for their vision. Arik Bokeh moved first. He secured the Mongol heartland, including Karakorum, the symbolic capital that Genghis Khan had established. He had the support of many traditional Mongol nobles who saw Kublai's Chinese leanings as a betrayal. He also had initial support from the Chagatai Khanate in Central Asia, which meant he could draw reinforcements from the empire's interior. Kublai had the resources of northern China, the wealthiest and most populated region in the Mongol sphere. He had Chinese engineers, Chinese armies, Chinese grain supplies, and the tax revenues of millions of Chinese subjects. He also had the personal loyalty of many Mongol generals who had served under him during the Chinese campaigns and who recognized his competence. The war lasted 4 years, 1260 to 1264, and it was brutal. Mongol cavalry fighting Mongol cavalry across the steppes of Mongolia and Central Asia. battles at places Western audiences have never heard of, Shimultai, the Angara River, where tens of thousands of the world's most elite horsemen slaughtered each other using the same tactics, the same formations, the same skills that had conquered half the world. It was, in a sense, the ultimate test of the Mongol military system. What happens when you pit it against itself? And while Kublai and Erik Böke tore the empire's heart apart, something equally devastating was happening 2,000 miles to the west, because the Toluid Civil War wasn't the only civil war happening. Remember Hulagu, the Mongol general who destroyed Baghdad in Episode 1? He had established the Ilkhanate, a Mongol state stretching across Persia, Iraq, and parts of modern-day Turkey. To his north sat the Golden Horde, ruled by Berk Khan, Jochi's grandson, controller of the Russian steppes in Eastern Europe. And Berk Khan had a problem with Hulagu, a big one. Berk Khan had converted to Islam. He was, by the 1260s, a devout Muslim ruling a Mongol state, and Hulagu had just destroyed Baghdad, the spiritual center of Sunni Islam, killed the caliph, and massacred hundreds of thousands of Muslims. To Berk Khan, this wasn't just political, it was personal. It was an offense against his faith, committed by his own cousin. And there was also the practical matter that Hulagu's Ilkhanate and Berk Khan's Golden Horde shared a disputed border in the Caucasus, a resource-rich region that both claimed. Faith and territory, the two oldest and most reliable causes of war in all of human history. In 1262, Berk Khan attacked Hulagu. Mongol fought Mongol in the Caucasus Mountains. And then Berk did something that would have been unthinkable a decade ago. He allied with the Mamluk Sultanate of Egypt. The Golden Horde, a Mongol state descended from Genghis Khan himself, formed a military and diplomatic alliance with the Mamluks, the very people who had defeated the Mongols at Ain Jalut. Berk was so consumed by hatred for Hulagu that he allied with his empire's greatest enemy to destroy his own cousin. If you ever needed proof that the Mongol Empire was finished as a unified entity, this was it.
By 1264, the damage was permanent. Kublai defeated Erik Böke. His brother surrendered after 4 years of war and died in custody 2 years later, probably poisoned. Kublai was Great Khan. But Great Khan of what? The Golden Horde didn't recognize him. The Shagafhai Khanate was in chaos. The Ilkhanate was at war with the Golden Horde. The title that once commanded half the world now commanded a fraction of it. The unified Mongol Empire, the thing Genghis Khan had spent his life building, was gone, and it was never coming back. What followed was not a single war, but a permanent state of warfare that consumed the Mongol world for decades. The four Khanates, the Yuan dynasty under Kublai in China and Mongolia, the Chagatai Khanate in Central Asia, the Golden Horde in Russia and Eastern Europe, and the Ilkhanate in Persia, became independent rival states that fought each other as often as they fought outsiders. And the wars didn't stop with Kublai and Erik Böke. They metastasized. In Central Asia, a Mongol prince named Kaidu, Ogadai's grandson, who believed with burning conviction that the Great Khanshik had been stolen from his branch of the family by the Toluids, launched a guerrilla war against Kublai that lasted over 30 years. 30 years! From the 1260s until Kaidu's death in 1301, he raided Kublai's western borders, disrupted the Silk Road trade routes that funded Kublai's court, allied with disaffected Chagatai princes, and created a permanent war zone across the heart of Central Asia that no amount of military force could pacify. Kublai, the most powerful ruler on earth, the emperor of China, commanding the tax revenues and manpower of over 100 million subjects, could not defeat one stubborn, brilliant cousin fighting asymmetric warfare from the mountains and steppes of Central Asia. Think about that for a moment. the man who completed the conquest of Song China, who ruled over 100 million people, who built the grandest court in Asia, spent the last 3 decades of his life unable to secure his own western frontier against a single family rival. Meanwhile, the Berke-Hulagu War had permanently poisoned relations between the Golden Horde and the Ilkhanate. Even after both Berke and Hulagu died in the 1260s, their successors continued the conflict. The Caucasus border became a permanent war zone. Trade between the two khanates collapsed. Diplomatic relations were hostile for generations. The Golden Horde's alliance with Mamluk Egypt, born out of Berke's hatred for Hulagu, became a permanent feature of medieval geopolitics, reshaping trade routes and power dynamics across the entire eastern Mediterranean. And here's what the civil wars destroyed beyond territory and armies. They destroyed the Mongol brand. For 50 years, the Mongols conquered through a combination of military excellence and psychological terror. Cities surrendered because they believed resistance was futile. The Mongols were unstoppable, unified, inevitable. Ain Jalut had cracked that myth. The civil wars shattered it completely. How do you claim to be an invincible, unified empire when everyone can see you fighting yourself? How do you demand submission from foreign kings when your own cousins won't submit to you? The aura of inevitability, the single most powerful weapon in the Mongol strategic arsenal, more devastating than any cavalry charge or siege engine, was gone. And without it, the empire's subject peoples began to sense weakness and push back. Rebellions erupted across all 4 khanates. In China, secret societies organized resistance. In Persia, local dynasties tested their independence. In Russia, princes began cautiously probing the Golden Horde's authority. Conquered peoples who had been too terrified to resist for decades now tested the limits of Mongol power and increasingly found those limits were real. The Mongol garrison states found themselves fighting on multiple fronts, external enemies, internal revolts, and rival khanates simultaneously, without any of the reinforcements or coordination that a unified empire could have provided. Each khanate was on its own. Each khanate was weakening, and each khanate's weakness made the others weaker still. Kublai Khan died in 1994 at the age of 78. He had conquered China, built a magnificent court, and earned a place in history as one of the greatest emperors in Asian history. But he died knowing that his grandfather's empire, the unified Mongol state that had been the most powerful political entity the world had ever seen, existed only in memory. The 4 khanates would persist for varying lengths of time. The Yuan dynasty fell in 1368, the Ilkhanate collapsed in 1335, the Chagatai Khanate fragmented into warring factions, and the Golden Horde gradually disintegrated over the following 2 centuries. But none of them ever reunited. The great empire was over. Genghis Khan's grandchildren had accomplished what no external enemy ever could. They destroyed the Mongol Empire from the inside.
The Mongol civil wars didn't just destroy an empire, they reshaped the entire world. Start with the most direct consequence, the Silk Road. For a brief period under unified Mongol rule, a period historians call the Pax Mongolica, it was possible to travel safely from China to Europe along the old trade routes. The Mongols enforced security, standardized trade practices, and created a connected Eurasian economy for the first and only time in pre-modern history. Marco Polo's famous journey from Venice to Kublai Khan's court was only possible because the Mongol peace made it safe. The civil wars killed that. When the khanates went to war with each other, the trade routes that crossed their borders became war zones. Merchants were robbed, taxed by competing authorities, or simply killed. The overland Silk Road, which had connected east and west for over 1,000 years, began its long decline. And as overland trade became more dangerous, European merchants started looking for alternative routes, sea routes. Routes that would eventually lead Portuguese and Spanish sailors around Africa and across the Atlantic.
The Age of Exploration, the event that reshaped the entire modern world, was driven in part by the collapse of the Mongol trade network. Then there's Russia. The Golden Horde's domination of the Russian principalities lasted over 2 centuries. The way Russia eventually overthrew that domination and the political culture it developed under Mongol rule shaped Russian governance, military culture, and territorial ambition in ways that echo to this day. Historians have long debated how much of Russia's tradition of centralized autocratic rule, its comfort with a strong leader, its suspicion of decentralized power, traces back to the Mongol period, but the influence is significant and undeniable. And in the Middle East, the Ilkhanate's collapse in 1335 created a power vacuum that was eventually filled by a new conqueror, Timur, also known as Tamerlane, who would launch his own campaigns of devastation across Central and Western Asia in the late 1300s. Timur claimed legitimacy through connection to Genghis Khan's bloodline. The Mongol civil wars didn't end the Mongol legacy. They scattered it, turned a single empire's ambition into a dozen successor conflicts that shaped Central Asia, the Middle East, and Eastern Europe for centuries. The unified Mongol Empire lasted roughly 60 years, from Genghis Khan's consolidation of power around 1206 to the civil wars of the 1260s. 60 years. In that time, they conquered more territory than any empire in history. And then the founder's own succession system, the same system that had distributed power among his sons, tore it all apart. The empire that conquered the world could not conquer the one enemy that actually mattered: itself.
Genghis Khan built a system for conquest, and it was brilliant, possibly the most effective military political machine in human history. But conquest and governance are different skills, and the system he designed could only do one of them. It could take the world. It couldn't keep it. Every generation, when a Khan died, the machine turned inward and started eating itself. And no one, not Ögedei, not Möngke, not Kublai, could fix the fundamental flaw, because the flaw was the foundation. You can't reform a system that was never designed for what you need it to do. That's the lesson the Mongol Empire teaches, and it's a lesson that empires, institutions, and civilizations keep learning the hard way, over and over again. The thing that makes you powerful is not the thing that keeps you alive.
Now, here's my question for the comments, and this one's been debated by historians for 800 years. Could anyone have saved the Mongol Empire? Was there a leader, a different succession system, a constitutional reform that could have held it together? Or was the fragmentation inevitable from the very moment Genghis Khan divided the empire among his sons? Was the seed of destruction planted at the moment of creation? I genuinely want to hear your arguments. Now, over these 4 episodes, we've covered an incredible arc of history: the destruction of Baghdad, the battle that broke Mongol invincibility, the fall of the Crusades, the implosion of the largest empire in history. And if you've been watching from the beginning, you've seen something emerge: a pattern. Civilizations rising, overreaching, rotting from within, and collapsing in ways that reshape everything that comes after. We're going to keep pulling on that thread. Next episode, we're heading somewhere completely different. A new century, a new part of the world, but the pattern holds, and the story is just as extraordinary. If you don't want to miss it, subscribe and hit the bell. This is History Rewind, the stories your school never taught you. I'll see you in the next one.